a traitor, a bully, eating a meal with Jesus? Come and see what happens. In Jesus' day, as now, sharing a meal with someone indicated friendship. We understand this instinctively. It's probably never occurred to you to offer a meal to a delivery driver or your hairdresser, unless, that is, you're seeking to grow in relationship with them. On the other hand, in almost every culture, sharing food is a sign of welcome and friendship. It's why sharing meals or going for drinks is an important part of these early weeks of term. When someone suggests we get food or go for a coffee, we understand it's an invitation to friendship. But in Jesus' day, this conviction ran deeper still. Jesus was a Jew, and Jewish home life revolved around the dinner table. Jewish families ate their weekly Sabbath meals there. They celebrated the Passover, their most important festival of the year, at that same table. And for Orthodox Jews, even today, many concerns about religious purity centre around the dinner table, concerning what you eat and who you eat with. For a first century Jew then, to eat a meal with someone was to make an important statement about your acceptance of that person. And Jesus spent a lot of time eating a lot of meals with a lot of people. One Bible writer is only half joking when he says that in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is always either heading to a meal, eating a meal, or heading away from a meal. And it all begins here, in the home of Levi. Levi is Jesus' latest follower. When he met Jesus, he'd been sitting at his booth in Capernaum, for until very recently, Levi was a tax collector. Now, it's hard to overemphasize how hated tax collectors were. They were initially despised for being in league with the oppressive and unjust Roman regime. But worse still, gathering these crippling taxes made tax collectors personally very rich. The Romans allowed them to collect more than the required amount and pocket the surplus. And Levi and his friends would have done so happily and heartlessly. Tax collectors were so hated that one document from the time even advises deep cleaning your home if a tax collector had been anywhere nearby. Levi is a collaborator, a traitor, and a bully. But it turns out that Jesus wants him. Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Jesus is for the hated and the hateful. Levi is just about the nastiest piece of work you can imagine, and yet Jesus singles him out. Jesus wants him. He accepts him. That's why he's willing to eat a meal with him. And not just with him. Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. It's an incredible picture, isn't it? The underbelly of society in a house almost certainly purchased using dirty money, and there, in the centre of them all, eating, laughing, and apparently happy to be their honoured guest and friend, is Jesus. The religious leaders of the day are scandalised as they watch on. Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? They demand. It's a good question. After all, like Jesus, these religious leaders were also interested in restoring people who were far from God. People like Levi. They too would have rejoiced over a tax collector who truly left their evil ways behind and began a right relationship with God. But for these religious leaders, the order was important. God had given a pattern detailing how his people ought to live. Tax collectors like Levi, they said, needed to adopt this pattern before ever hoping to be accepted by God. What troubled the religious leaders was that Jesus seemed to have got the order all wrong. They wanted to see Jesus preaching down to sinners as their superior, rather than eating and drinking with them as if he were their partner in crime. But listen to Jesus' reply. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill. If a patient suffering from a fatal disease is never cared for by a doctor, they'll die. There's no chance of recovery, and the religious authorities would have recognized that Levi's friends were the sickest of the sick. So you're asking me, says Jesus, to be like a doctor who refuses to have contact with anyone sick. But a doctor who avoids sick people can't do their job. And neither can I. That's why Jesus has to be at Levi's house. He is more interested in pursuing the sick and the sinful than pleasing the supposedly righteous. And it's why he'd ultimately die. How could people like Levi be forgiven after all they've done? How could they be cleansed and made well? How could they receive a second chance? Well, only because Jesus was willing to pour out his own life to death for them on the cross. And we see that same willingness here in Levi's dining room. Jesus' first response to moral failures is not judgment or condemnation or even a counselling session. No, he offers them something so much better. Blood-bought forgiveness, affection, and welcome. So what about us? Perhaps in the early weeks of term, you're aware you've fallen short. You've crossed lines you never thought you'd cross. You feel ashamed. You're asking, will God really want me now? Well, look again to Jesus. He is the friend of sinners. He banquets with the broken, knowing exactly what they're like. And just as he welcomed Levi, he will welcome you if you ask him. Then perhaps, following Jesus' example, as members of our Christian unions, we'll befriend and eat not just with the pleasant and the proper, but also with the rebels and the rejects. A group of students eating this way in Jesus' name, well, it won't leave our universities unchanged.